Hi, everybody, and those coming in now. Welcome to the webinar today. Of course, this is the end of scale, how media is evolving as referral traffic falls and cookies change. I'm Mitch Hansen. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at OpenWeb, and I'm going to host the discussion today. Joining me, we have the Chief Revenue Officer at Freestar, Heather Carver, and the Head of Programmatic and Emerging Revenues at the Weather Company, Felix Zhang. Thank you both for making the time, joining us today, being here for 10 minutes before for our pre-show hangout. And I'll give both of you guys a proper intro in just a minute. And for everybody watching, a little bit on the run of show, we're going to have maybe 20, 30-minute discussion, maybe a little bit longer, with our guests about the main topic for today. And then we're going to open up the floor to everyone watching. So use the Q&A tool to submit your questions if you have any. We had a few that came in actually before via email, so we'll go through those too. And if I think Andrew said that the chat is closed, but if it's open and you use it, we might not see it. So just make sure you use the Q&A tool. Now, before we jump into the discussion, I'm just going to take a minute, introduce OpenWeb for anybody here who's not familiar with us. Like I said, I'm the Vice President of Marketing at OpenWeb. And OpenWeb is on a mission to build a healthier web that's safe for users, fair for advertisers, and profitable for publishers. We build engagement products that help publishers build loyal communities of readers. We always say we try to turn your kind of transient, temporary visitors into registered, loyal users. And we build monetization products that connect brands directly with those communities. And that's all powered by our first-party data. So wherever your audience is, we can get there, on page or off. Today, OpenWeb serves 170 million monthly active users. This year, we launched partnerships with some major publishers like CNN, the Arena Group, Fandom, Goal, Daily Mail, and some major brands like Ford, Virgin Atlantic, Adobe, Porsche, SodaStream, Volkswagen. Is it Porsche? I think it's up for debate. So if you have any questions about OpenWeb or you want to learn more about us, just reach out to me. You can reach out to me here in the chat, on LinkedIn, at my email, which I'll throw in the chat. Or you can just go to our website. We have a contact form and we will see it. So thank you. And enough about OpenWeb. Let's get to the discussion. So first, like I said, proper introduction for our guests. Start with Heather. Heather's a leader in her field with over 10 years of experience in advertising and publishing at amazing companies like Magnite, Amazon. And today, as I mentioned before, she's the CRO of Freestar, leading all things growth at the company. So Heather, thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for hosting the panel, and thank you to OpenWeb for putting this together to talk about such an important topic that is really front and center these days with publishers, including Freestar. And as you mentioned, I've got I think I'm coming up on almost 20 years industry experience, and I started out on the publisher side, and actually Felix and I both at different points in our career worked at different parts of IAC. I worked for the Match Media Group, where really focused on ad ups and ad network optimization. Saw the rise of RTB. So ad ups, pub side, near and dear to my heart, and so it's really great now to be working with a lot of different publishers to help them with monetization. And then I spent 10 years on the SSP side at Magnite, working with many different publishers, different types of business models, e-com publishers, news publishers, other media types publishers, the Weather Channel. So I've gotten a lot of experience working on the pub side and have seen the evolution of, the high traffic days, the glory days of driving high volumes of traffic. Also saw the launch of Google Ad Exchange and, the evolution from a waterfall tag-based world to header bidding today. So for Freestar, for those of you who are not familiar with Freestar, we work with over 500 leading digital publishers, global publishers, and we provide header bidding technology that's enabled to help with their ad stack monetization. And we also provide consulting to our publishers, which of course includes consulting on things like how to continue to drive traffic in some of the headwinds we've seen today.
Amazing. So a lot of relevant experience to talk about the topic at hand today. And now I will intro Felix. Felix, a lot of people here probably know Felix, and Heather too, of course. Felix is an industry expert with over a decade of experience in the publishing industry, 10 years at the Weather Company, now IBM alone, where he leads the programmatic business and identifies new opportunities for revenue. So Felix, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you for joining this conference call, everyone. So thankful for you spending time with us. So I've been in the publishing industry for about 20 years now, ever since my about.com days, where I was working with Heather at IAC. So publishing is near and dear to my heart. I've been working on all parts of the publishing org, whether it's business development, finance, and finally programmatic monetization for the last 15 years. For those of you who might not be familiar with the weather company, we are the leader in data and forecasting weather information for consumers and businesses. And so I'm really happy we're having this discussion today because these topics are important for my fellow publishers.
All right. Yeah. Thanks again for joining us. Okay. So we can kick it off. So I'll give a very short preamble and we'll get to the questions. So first, let's start with this. Generative AI is finding its way into every part of business. Cookie tracking, needless to say, it's changing a lot. And not unrelatedly, referral traffic is falling. That means, as Heather kind of said earlier, this era of reliable, huge numbers of new visitors hitting the page is coming to an end. We already see it happening. We have been calling this the end of scale. So let's go to our first question. How would you define the end of scale, and why do you think this is happening? And we'll start with you, Heather.
Sure. I mean, I had said it before, but I think the end of scale to me really means like the end of the glory days and sort of the wild, wild west of probably like 2010 to 2018, where a lot of publishers were chasing scale to grow revenue. And a lot of times chasing scale meant sacrificing the quality of content. When you're looking at content creation, it was about trying to get as many clicks as possible. So I kind of see the end of scale as being like the end of like this way to drive a lot of scale through like the walled gardens and Google to get traffic to your site. And so I think that's ultimately a good thing. While it's been really hard for a lot of publishers, there's a flight back to quality and making sure, Google's made obviously updates with the Google Helpful Content update. They're making constant tweaks to make sure that, there's that shift to make sure that the content is actually being helpful. And, there's been a lot of talk around MFA. Again, it's that end of the era of just driving mass amounts of traffic to just kind of drain advertisers' budgets and take money. Is over. So again, it's really about focusing back to quality, helpful content. And ultimately, I think that's a good thing for consumers and a good thing for advertisers, right? Who are looking to actually have outcomes. And usually when users are more engaged, you're going to get, better outcomes for buyers too. So I look at it as the end of sort of that era of the wild, wild west. And now there's changes that are happening. And, why this is happening, again, a couple buckets. I see it is, the walled gardens have changed their policies. So I think there's a stat in 2018, about 30% of traffic for media and news sites was driven by Facebook, and that fell to around 7% of March of this year. So again, a lot of policy changes from Facebook and other walled gardens. Search generative experience, as you mentioned, Google's AI tool has really helped, kind of not helped, but kind of hurt publishers from the zero click attribution, right? Publisher or consumers don't have to actually go in and click on the content and visit the websites. Google's made some recent changes that have actually been really, really positive to, link to publishers' sites. So that's actually helping. And then I think there is another element of consumer changes where, Gen Z and millennials are preferring to go search on, in TikTok and Meta, right? And look there for traffic and rather than going through Google. So that's another kind of change that has happened.
Felix, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I don't know if this is necessarily a change for some premium publishers. I think when we focus on what our users need and why we make a product essential to users, it isn't like a break in time. We continue to see increases in traffic because the weather is changing. It's more erratic, right? I mean, growing up in New York City, I never thought I would wear a t-shirt in February, but that's exactly what happened in February 2023, right? And unfortunately, what we saw with the recent hurricanes, like areas you didn't expect to have hurricanes, that's where we go. And so there is a need for essential weather information to keep you safe, to determine where you should evacuate to, or simply like what to wear. So you're not being strange wearing a big jacket when it's 75 degrees out there. And so I think when you just try to figure out how to produce a product that satisfies users' needs, how to become essential, then you don't see this break in traffic. You continue to see new waves of users coming in because they need this information. We've just recently rolled out our iOS app, and it was going to be on Android as well. And what I've seen is when I go to client meetings, I'm helping clients download the new app, and I'm getting new users. You know, part of my job in addition to selling, but this is something really, really great. It feels great to get new users on. One point I do agree with Heather on is that users are accessing weather information through other means, right? Whether it's TikTok, whether it's other devices. So we just can't stick to just web and mobile web or even mobile app. We have to look at all other screens and how users get information, and we have to follow that trend.
Yeah, I think there's that flight toward engagement and engaging users and finding them where they are. And that's something we work with our publishers on, is like, focusing away from just trying to drive as much traffic to their sites as possible, but really focusing on, engagement and longer term strategies.
Right. Actually, well, that was going to be kind of my follow-up there. How important is it from your perspectives to bring users back home? And by the way, as a millennial, a little bit of an older millennial, like I can't personally imagine searching TikTok for any information. I don't understand what you would get from TikTok. Maybe it's just me. But yeah, I mean, how important is it to bring those users home, and maybe how would publishers go about it when, as you mentioned, social traffic has been falling for the better part of a decade, and now search, although they have definitely thrown a bone to publishers after the initial media backlash from search generative experience. We definitely are still seeing traffic overall falling from search. So how important is it to bring them back and users back to on site? And how do you think publishers should maybe go about doing that? You mentioned longer term strategy.
I think it's essential. It's never been changing, right? Like what you want is users connecting directly to your website, going directly to your app, right? Rather than trying to figure out where you rank in a third party and trying to move your rankings to get traffic. It's always about getting your users onto your site directly and figuring out what value you can provide to make your site essential to these users, so they would think of you guys first. That's really the battle that you're fighting, right? Like they need this information. How do you become that best source of information?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me right now, it's really, and we have an audience development team here at Freestar that works really closely with all of our publishers, who have been facing these headwinds and trying to turn them into tailwinds for them, and really kind of deep dive on the stats to help them understand what content is performing really well, right? And what's the type of content that the users who keep returning to your site, like, really diving into those analytics and helping to uncover that for our publishers. And so it's about prioritizing that editorial content so that it's a differentiator and it's useful. And that's something that's going to create more engaged users who are going to want to come back over and over again. We're also working on things like, you want to prioritize that kind of front door traffic, if you will, instead of relying on, the Googles and the Metas of the world. So newsletters could be a really good way to, we talk to our publishers about creating newsletters to, you can also use it for advertising to get deterministic emails and be able to use that. But in addition, it's get people to sign up for newsletters. They want to engage with your content. So those are other strategies we're working with our publishers on. And diversifying revenue streams is something else that publishers can do too, by offering things like webinars and other subscriptions and e-commerce to, again, kind of create additional value for the consumers who are coming to their site.
So I hear a lot about building brand preference, right? And just making you the go-to for whatever your vertical is. And then, having that funnel and increasing kind of loyalty and return visits and things like that, right? Obviously, those are very related. Overall, I guess what I'm hearing, you know, as sort of is the premise, the era of lots of traffic flowing, the end of scale is here, right? Do you feel that this opens more doors than it closes? Or you mentioned diversifying revenue streams. Yeah, maybe that's the answer. What should publishers do right now? And are more doors opening than closing, or is it a bad situation?
I mean, I think it's going to be bad for low quality pubs. They're going to be hit the hardest. Those that, you know, again, you talk about, there's so much talk about MFA pubs who really, you know, it's real humans going to these sites, but it's about clickbait. And, you know, someone was saying the other day that, you know, there are ads that are completely unrelated to, you know, click through to an MFA site. And like the ad itself had nothing to do with, like, it was misleading and just, it was like a toenail fungus ad or something that it's clickbaity, but then drove to a site that had, it was like cute kittens. So I feel like those are the kind of publishers, and they're already being dinged, right? I think Chris Kane from Jound said, I think a couple summers ago, about 30% of budgets were going to MFA sites. And then when the ANA called that out, within a month, that shrank, like cut in half. And so buyers really are speaking with their wallets and moving away and wanting quality. So yes, low quality publishers are going to be dinged. And then it's really about figuring out, you know, doubling down on content. So one of the things I see as a huge value for Freestar is publishers, you know, they may not be tech companies, and they may, you know, they have to take cost cutting measures and may not, you know, they may not be as big as Weather Channel, right? And have teams that can help them with pre-bid and set up header bidding to maximize revenue. So they're trying to do that while also focusing on content. So at Freestar, we feel like, you know, we can kind of handle that part for you. You don't have big teams, so that publishers can then really, really focus on content and engagement and not get tripped up on, oh, do I have the right, you know, CMP settings? Do I have the right identity providers? Do I have the right demand sources? Am I on the latest version of pre-bid? If not, is that going to impact my monetization? So I think that's a trend we've seen too, more and more publishers coming in to need help with that so they can focus on content and, you know, focus on newsletters and other ways to drive engagement.
I think it's an opportunity for us. And I don't think it's an end of scale for us. It's more like adding to scale. One good example is a major outlet of information used to use our weather data, and they stopped. And as a result, they basically started losing users because they were not providing some features that users were used to getting, right? Like 15-minute rain forecast. Kind of important when you want to go outside to get like real-time reporting on, you know, if you need to bring an umbrella or a jacket, right? And so that gives us an opportunity to use our data and differentiate ourselves and show why users need us. And now we have been slowly getting those users away from that outlet onto our own and operated apps. And so we have seen an increase in traffic because there is a flight to quality, because users value that information. And when you provide that information on what users want, then you see an increase in traffic year over year.
And I think that kind of actually goes into the next question I have here, which is specifically for you, Felix. You know, this whole topic, the end of scale. My question is, how has it affected the weather company, and what have you done to address those challenges?
So it hasn't affected the weather company because we never really focus on like where we in terms of rankings and trying to maximize the traffic from these third-party sources. We have always focused on the front door. How do we get users onto our site? What do they care about, and making the product better? But like Heather mentioned earlier, it's about the changing user preferences and where they're getting information. And we have to provide that information on where they're accessing it, right? And so from our side, what we're doing is we continually looking at things that users value and providing more of what they value. It's an ongoing journey. And we look at in terms of like what are adjacent to weather, right? Like if you just get your information, maybe you're interested in running, maybe you're interested in health. All those things are adjacent. and we're providing that information in addition to the weather information, right? And so that's how we're getting more engagement and getting more impressions from our users.
And Heather, you mentioned at Freestar you work with a lot of publishers. Many of them don't have maybe the brand recognition in the existing user base of the weather company. So how have you kind of dealt with these problems? And because I think that's a great, like Felix, what you were just saying, absolutely lines up with kind of like everything that I've heard too. And I think you guys have a tremendous asset in brand awareness. So I wonder for those publishers that maybe don't have that, how can you execute kind of a similar strategy, and how do you handle this at Freestar?
Yeah, there's a couple things. One thing we see with some of the publishers that we work with that I call like utility sites, they have a lot of direct traffic, like FlightAware or, some of the, solitaire gaming sites, right? They have loyal users that come back, and that's a really great position to be in. They're a little bit insulated from, kind of Google algorithm changes, likely weren't driving a lot of traffic from the social platforms. So, we work with those types of publishers to make sure that their core web vitals and other things are good. And that, if they're going to have advertising, there's a really good balance of using header bidding technology, but running a light tech to make sure we're not, causing them to lose users, right? And creating other issues on their site. So that's one part. We also, a couple of years ago, I mentioned this already, we doubled down and invested in an audience development team. And so we do audits of sites. We work with partners like DeepSea and SEMrush and really look at these sites and help our publishers understand, we give SEO tactics if they are driving some, traffic from search, but we also help them understand like what type of content is working well for them and making sure they're creating more of that content. And then, as I mentioned as well, newsletter strategies, other ways that they can provide value and increase that direct traffic, because there's a correlation between direct traffic and the quality of content. So again, from a tech side, we help our publishers a lot so they can really focus on that content. And then we can help consult them on, what we see across our breadth of publishers that we work with on the strategies that can help them get more of that organic direct traffic.
And all of this that we're talking about, how has this impacted planning for the next year? Anticipating more changes that might come, and just looking ahead to 2025. And either of you can start.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think for us, part of it is as a publisher brand, in many ways, Freestar is seen as a publisher, right? We manage the full monetization. We currently do fully managed for the publishers that we work with. So when we look to acquire new publishers, we, a huge part of our strategy, and it really always has been, but there's that much more of a focus of making sure that the sites we bring on have a lot of direct traffic, good quality sites, right? So that's been a big part of our strategy planning. What are the type of sites? I mentioned utility sites that people like time.is. People go there because they want to know what time it is. They go directly to that site. So those are the kind of sites I think that will be a little bit more insulated from these, Google algorithm updates, for example. Continue to really double down on that audience development, working and consulting our pubs on that. And then first party data and figuring out, especially as cookies continue to, go away. Already a bunch of our traffic is cookieless. We're focusing on how can we, bring more value with the first party data that we have, drive more direct relationships with our advertisers through programmatic guaranteed and PMP deals. So that's really where we're trying to spend our time focusing just with some of the traffic headwinds.
And Felix.
Yeah, from our side, first I wanted to add to the previous question, as a user of content and reader of content, I mean, I really like what The Atlantic did. They really changed the way that they produce content and articles. And now I've become a more loyal user, right? So just because you have been on a current path doesn't mean you can't change your path and become a different and essential product for your users, right? But that said, on our side, we've been looking at a number of things. We were preparing for the loss of cookies for many years now, I guess since they started talking about it. And our data is privacy centric, right? Like you don't need to know individuals to get what information. We just need to know where you are, right? And we don't need to access each individual's whatever email addresses or whatnot. That data is privacy safe. And then from our side, we've seen success with the iOS app, and we're gonna basically expand that out throughout other platforms. So we anticipate growth in 2025.
Yeah, I think that I talk about this a lot, but it's like the long game, right? So the end of scale, where there's a lot of like wild west gaming the system, and then publishers freak out when all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, you were so dependent on driving traffic from that, and it dries up, right? And so it really, I see it as a really positive thing, again, for consumers, for brands who want to advertise, because there is that flight to quality. And maybe in the short term, you have to make some changes that are going to impact your traffic and revenue, but long term, right, you can rebuild your brand and do it in a way that's actually going to make you come back stronger, and create more of those loyal users and a durable long-term brand, rather than a quickly spun up MFA site that you spin up, you spin down, you create another one, right? It's like whack-a-mole. So I'm encouraged in a lot of ways. I'm encouraged by the August update that Google had, getting feedback on their core platform updates. We actually saw 1 out of 3 of our publishers grow their traffic by more than 20% with that update. So, and Google now putting the links within the SGE, the AI search results that come up. So it's really about doubling down and focusing on quality and the consumer. And I'm encouraged by it, because I do think it's better. It helps. It's good for the industry as a whole too, right? It's not this like, oh, gaming the system. It's really just getting back to quality.
Right. And actually, Felix, you mentioned specifically something that the Atlantic did. I'm actually not familiar with what they've done. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, they focus more on deeper content, and they also focus on reporting on topics that could drive user interest. And so I've been reading a lot more of the articles in terms of like my portfolio, what I read. And so they definitely have moved up in terms of like the publications I read.
Yeah. And of course, we've also seen lots of big publishers sort of acquire different verticals. Obviously, I think most famously would be the New York Times and gaming.
Yeah.
And Heather, you mentioned newsletters a few times. I think overall, what we're really seeing, and I think if I had to give my own kind of spin on like what is the takeaway from this concept of the end of scale, it's that publishers need to increase the amount of revenue per user. As simple as that. It's the 80-20 rule. You're going to have, of your whole traffic, you're going to have a smaller number of people who are loyal, just by virtue of the fact that in most verticals, many people are reporting on similar things. You need to increase the your differentiation. And then when you get that loyal user who loves what you do specifically, find different ways to get them more involved in your brand. And it's things you all have mentioned so far. So e-commerce, newsletters, events, webinars, whatever it might be. I've seen print come back, right? We've seen print come back for a few publishers, which say that in 2018, I mean, everybody was shutting down, right? So it's definitely an interesting time. And looking ahead,
I mean,
2025. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me jump into there a little bit. I think there needs to be testing and understanding your users, right? Some of the things you mentioned, commerce, yes, it definitely helps with the revenue line. But if you look at it, like, what does it do to user engagement? Are they seeing like you just throwing more ads on their site, right? Are you like, doing things that move away from your mission of providing essential information to your users, right? Like there is a downside to it, right? And so I think publishers need to test and evaluate what their users appreciate, and make sure they don't deviate from what got users through the front door in the first place.
I think that's a really great point. Like, again, it goes to the long game. Are you just slapping some e-commerce stuff on just to get a new line of revenue, or does it actually align with providing value? If you're going to write reviews about something, it makes sense to maybe have some e-commerce, but again, you don't want to jam a square peg into a round hole just to spin up a new line of business. And there's a question from Derek in the channel, and I think that's some of what we're saying here. There could be good approaches to me, Felix, you kind of hit on it, is using data to truly understand how your users are engaging with your content, and how can you double down on the stuff that is creating more content? How can you, create more of that content, create more of a dialogue with your, consumers of your site? And try to get some sort of referral traffic, find other ways to like post the content that's doing really well to drive traffic to your site. I don't know, Felix, if you have any recommendations on that front, especially if a publisher is already getting a lot of organic traffic, how do you then grow your user base?
Yeah, I think he mentioned a small business which doesn't have like the great start like a brand like us. I think what's the truism that I go to is like, go talk to your users who do use your product, right? Like, what is stopping them from saying like, hey, I want to recommend this product to all my friends. I want to show this new app, the new experience to my boss. I want my boss to download this. Like, what do I need to do to make those changes to actually get to that point, right? And it's about just going out, connecting with your users, figuring out what they want, how to excite them. You gotta make that effort.
Yeah, I think that is true. Like, and using, understanding your users, and then maybe some like lookalikes of how to acquire some of those users who are consuming your content already, and then trying to find ways to get in front of, similar type users to grow your base. I definitely think there's a really good point though, to like getting actual voice of your customer, as Felix said, and truly understanding them. And from that, you can then find ways, different tactics and ways to get more of those types of users or similar users.
Yeah, and we have in the chat as well, Stephen gave a bit of a definition, which I think is very much in line. Now, I had a part of this discussion where I kind of want to talk about 2025, the year right ahead of us. We talked a little bit about the planning that you're doing for 2025 at Freestar, at the weather company, but taking a little bit of a wider view at the industry as a whole. I've got a few different sort of prompts here, and I just kind of wonder what your reaction and what your take on these things are. So first, major factor for next year that I'm hearing about from virtually everyone and every publication is about Google's antitrust case. So if indeed this pans out the way that it very well may, and Google is, for lack of a better word, broken up, how do you think this will impact publishers? Huge question. But if there's a way you can summarize, and either of you can jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think it will be a good thing. It'll be interesting, though, what will actually happen when that happens. So, a lot of people who testified, like Matt Wheatland, for example, from Daily Mail or Mail Online, their formal name now. I apologize if I'm not saying the right company name, but testified that we looked, and I think Steph Laser from News Corp said a similar thing. We looked at trying not to use Google's ad server, but then what do? You're going to stand to lose millions upon millions of dollars because of the integration with AdX. So header bidding helped to level the playing field a little bit, but not completely, right? And so it'll be interesting if that happens. You separate the ad server. Does Google create a header bidder adapter, a pre-bid header bidder adapter? That would sort of be, I think that's ultimately what publishers wanted, right? And have better APIs into the ad server to further level the playing field. Google attempted to do it, right, with open bidding. That still wasn't quite enough. So for me, I'm curious what will happen, and if that does happen, where does Google demand go? Is it just going to be a tag, or I would love to see Google maybe collaborate a little bit more closely with a pre-bid and figure out ways to still, you know, kind of bring their demand to publishers with, you know, the current technology, primarily, you know, in the case of our publishers, that pre-bid technology. I know Amazon's making some changes to play nicely with pre-bid as well. And so that's encouraging. And then maybe Google will follow suit, but I don't know what you think, Felix.
Yeah, I think the legal process takes a long time and there are multiple appeals. So anybody expecting like a big change might be disappointed in 2025. I do think that there is a lot of innovation in the marketplace. That's why I've been in this industry for 20 years. It's always something new, something to learn, something changing. And so I think there will be changes that happen without a breakup or without a major disruption. And I think those changes would be for the better. So I'm not thinking that there will be a major break in 2025. I think there will be some gradual shifts, right, that Google may make in response, and that will basically help the industry become more transparent, bring more competition, all good things.
Agree.
Great.
Yeah, it will be slow going. I do not imagine any, you know, immediate, even 2025, 2026 changes, but everyone will be following closely, no doubt.
And if anything, any sort of indicate if the past any kind of indication, how long did we go back and forth on cookies with Google? I mean, not that this is their decision, but we've all just, I think, become accustomed to waiting for big things to come out of Google. So one more from me, and then I'll ask you guys more generally. But of course, you know, over the last couple of years, a trend for quite a while, and we've been talking about it indirectly. Advertisers shift money to the walled garden. It's been happening for a long time, continues to happen every year. What do you think publishers can do? And it's a big question, but next year to regain the trust of advertisers and make sure that they continue to support the open internet?
I mean, one thing I see from my perspective is a big growth and you know, it's, buzzword right now is curation, and a lot of the large SSPs with big, you know, big agency brand direct sales teams are able to use curation as a way to provide that safety net to advertisers so that they can figure out ways to, you know, feel like it's in a, you know, brand safe environment, and you know, the inventory is being curated to the KPIs that they need, whether it's, you know, a viewability or a VCR metric. It's they're getting the right content. So I think that's one way that the SSPs in particular and other curators like an Audigent, I think, have done a good job at trying to take those dollars and allow buyers to scale, right, in these one-to-many deals. I feel like PMPs, especially for, you know, the smaller publishers, some of the smaller pubs that we work with, it's hard to do one-to-one deals and have those really scale out. Whereas you go to a walled garden, you get the scale, you get the data. So I'm really encouraged by seeing this level of curation. And you know, as big publishers, I think there's you know, ways that big publishers through deals can offer some real differentiation from the open market. And you know, especially when you think of you know, news publishers, right? There's ways where news publishers can work directly with advertisers to make sure they're not just cutting off certain keywords and they're able to still monetize the news that consumers clearly want to go and read. So I think there's a new initiative from, I believe it's Double Verify, around, you know, they just hired someone, I believe, to like focus specifically on news and trust and make sure that big reputable news sites aren't just being cut off from spend because certain keywords. So I think there's a lot of good work and innovation being done around there.
I think there starts off with making sure you do the right things as publishers, making sure you don't do any kind of games that produces MFA. You know, your reputation, you have to basically maintain as a trusted brand, right? And whether it's one of the top 10 trusted brands, that requires a lot of maintenance and making sure that you don't do and deviate from that path. I think it's also about understanding why your users visit the site. Like we understand users come to our site and are asked to plan their day. This is what they open up in the morning to make sure and decide like what they wear, what the activities they do. And so when you have those insights and why your users come to us, you can provide that data back to advertisers and clients, right? And collaborate and figure out like, what do you want to bring in front of this audience who are planning their day? Like what products and services make sense? And as long as you provide those kind of insights and measurement, I think you'll be fine.
And, so that's great. Is there any other sort of major trend in publishing to watch for in 2025 that you think we should cover, or anything that's on your mind that you're looking forward to next year?
I think we covered most of these topics, right?
Yeah, we have
like
covered quite a
newsletters,
lot.
diversifying, you see some publishers now doing events, and so that's a trend, right? If you're not going to get as much traffic, maybe I'm going to focus on events. I'm still going to have, digital display but there's that. And then, but to me, I think it's about prioritizing editorial content and really focusing on understanding your users. And I love Felix's point about like, why not talk directly to some of your users and understand why they keep coming back to your site, what's interesting to them. So it's really developing that first party data, closer user engagement. And that is really follows after having good quality content like weather, right? People really go and trust that site and they use it day to day. It's a really great tool for consumers. So, double down and keep doing those things that, are creating that trust and loyalty with your brand. So I'm just reiterating the point. I think that, editorial content, quality editorial content and focusing on the long game is crucial.
I think it's about finding new uses for your content and how users consume them, right? Simulation is something that, we've seen probably not when I was a child, but now you can get glasses that simulate a lot of different situations. How do you bring your content into that environment where they're not going to read an article about the weather while you're doing simulation? But if the simulation is showing like it's a rainstorm, like creating that kind of feeling or that kind of environment, right? To help them understand the weather data and the weather information. I think that it's something that we have to keep up with and be aware of, right? Because users are not getting information from reading a web page or reading a newspaper anywhere.
Right. So between both of those answers, I hear, like quality editorial, quality information, giving users what they actually want, and giving them lots of different ways to engage with both the information itself and also your brand as a publisher. And if that's how publishers should approach this idea of the end of scale, then that's a great answer. So we had a couple of questions that we got via email before we jumped on today. So I'm going to run through those really quick because we have a couple extra minutes. So let's start with that. First one, what advice would you offer up to other publishers seeking to proactively address disruptions in traffic volume? We may have kind of covered this. Is there anything additional that you'd like to say regarding on that question?
I mean, I think it comes down to me, it's, what disruptions are you seeing and what can you attribute that to? And kind of working backwards from that. Like, is it that, you don't have a lot of returning users? Is it, people bouncing from your content? I mean, I think it's really goes down to like looking at the data and understanding what's impacting it. Yes, it could be the Google helpful content update, but then does that mean that your content wasn't as helpful and you're just chasing clicks to bring people to your site? So I think we've said it a couple times. It's really because every publisher is different. Every publisher is not every publisher, but every publisher generally is unique. And so one situation that works for one pub, which is why at Freestar, we do focus on one-to-one consultation with our publishers to dive into these things and say, well, here's 5 things we think you can do. Here's what we're seeing is impacting your traffic, and these are our suggestions. So it's not a very clear answer, but it really is. It's like looking at the data and maybe working with a partner or talking to other publishers and trying to figure out strategies and, looking at that data to sort of unwind it and then kind of rebuild.
It makes sense. We've covered a lot of options on this in this conversation. But yeah, it's got to be highly dependent on the specific publisher and their specific situation. So yeah, Felix, anything you want to add?
I agree that you have to look at data, and specifically you have to look at how the traffic is coming through your site, right? How do you optimize towards more organic and getting it to site organically rather than relying on third party, right? And why do users come to you using a third party site, right? And so like I think you have to get that understanding, and once you have that understanding, then you can start innovating on the value you bring and figuring out like how do you get more into that front door.
Yeah, and something you mentioned a minute ago about AR or VR, it's a pretty cool idea. And I actually think it's not unrelated to what we were talking about earlier with search on TikTok. There's unusual ways that consumers are finding the information that they want. And I suppose it is the job of the publisher to try to deliver that information in a differentiated way in those places.
And like understanding who are your core users. Are they Gen Z? Are they millennials? Are they an older user base? And doing research on like who and what is your mission? What's your value? What are you trying to bring to your consumers? And focusing on that, right? If you realize all of your consumers think about the acquisitions that Meta made. Why did they acquire Instagram and then WhatsApp? It's just knowing and understanding, oh, wow, there's a whole new set of users I could be acquiring, and kind of going after that strategy. I think it's similar in the publishing world of like truly understanding who you're trying to get to your site and what are their consumer behaviors. And if consumer behaviors are changing, then how, to Felix's point, do you innovate to bring people into your front door? Is it a new event? And then you get newsletters, and those newsletters drive people to your site. There's all sorts of different tactics, I think, that can be leveraged by just, truly understanding what your mission is, and what your value is to your consumers, and then developing a strategy around that. So again, the end of scale is like the end of the shenanigans of people being able to game the system and just drive, clicks to, what Brad Pitt looked like when he was,
right,
a baby, and you have to click through 8,000 pictures to go, to finally get it, and then you never find the picture. I'm not clickbait material. I'm just kidding. I do like clickbait sites, but seriously, it is really, those days are over. And so if you really wanted to have a sustainable business, long-term, durable, you got to think about those things.
I mean, they're obviously pretty successful, so you're not the only one who ends up on those sites clicking through 35 pictures. When you were talking about kind of the shenanigans of the Wild West of that era, and the one that always comes to mind for me is, do you guys remember Upworthy? Like the ultimate algorithm tethered website that the second Facebook changed their algorithm, the site ceased to exist. And I think that was what, 2013 or something. And it's amazing how so long ago the lesson is still super relevant. And actually, something that you just mentioned, Heather, it was the about newsletters, so first party data, right? And we've talked a lot about first party data. The only other question that I have that was emailed to us is about cookies and third party cookies. And obviously, this has been a topic for as long as I've been around. We know Google has backed up. It's kind of old news now on depreciating cookies in Chrome. But we are looking ahead to this kind of like cookie-lite world, right? So now that change has happened, we've all had a little bit of time to catch our breath and adjust. Is there a pertinent kind of next move for publishers? I'm trying to elaborate on the question a bit. Or is it kind of stay the course? We were all preparing for a world where there would be no cookies in the largest browser. They're already not in Safari or, et cetera. Apple's asking you not to track. Do we stay the course and continue as publishers to prepare for what was going to be the cookieless world? Or do we lean into this change and try to take advantage of it? Or is it too unstable?
I mean, as publishers, I would recommend staying the course and rapidly deploying your solutions for a cookieless world. I think that one hand, you basically prepare for the future, but on the other hand, your solutions are also helping you raise CPMs on Safari and also iOS app, right? So things that could help you with monetization in the near term, right? And I think that that's the course of action I would recommend to other publishers.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've already been, a lot of publishers are super mobile heavy, iOS traffic. And so kind of been dealing with it already for a long time. I talked to a lot of publishers the other week who are like, we basically have acted like cookies don't exist for, a couple of years now. And I think it comes down to collaboration too. So as a publisher, continue to collaborate with the buy side and understand, what identifiers are they using, whether it's a mix of deterministic and probabilistic, what's working for them. Of course, we talked about this a bunch, but trying to get more of that first party data and understand more about your consumers and have closer relationships so that you can use that and publish your first party data. The pendulum is going to swing back to putting control more on the pub side. Whereas I think with the rise of RTB, things shifted over to the buy side for a while, right? Where they would layer on data and publishers like, I don't know what they're targeting. What data segment? Is it a good data segment? Third party data? How accurate is it? So I kind of see it as a, if you can, I mean, it's not easy for every publisher, but where possible, and thinking about strategies where you can get more of that first party data and have that pendulum swing in the way of the publisher, where buyers have to come to you and you're like, I know more about my consumers than some third party data segment that says 50% of my users are male, but I know that 90% of them are male. So why don't you come back to me? I've got all this data. So I think that's a good thing to focus on. And again, collaboration, what ID providers are people using to make inventory more addressable, or, are there creative formats? I mean, I think there's a lot of engagement on better creative. Consumers tend to engage better with creatives, and that could be another way to work with brands to have better looking creatives and not be so focused on like, this data targeting that people got so obsessed with.
Yeah. It definitely does feel like that era. I think maybe when you say this era peaked, in your opinion, this era of big data and targeting across publishers.
Sorry, was that a question?
Yeah, when would you say this really peaked?
Oh, of what the buyers kind of layering data on their side?
Yeah.
I mean, the rise of RTB, right? In like the late 2000s and sort of probably up until 2018, 2019, when Apple started making all of these changes. And, I think there's still a dependence on cookies. I mean, I don't want to say that there isn't, but there's been plenty of time to kind of think through other strategies. And there's some really savvy publishers out there. I would say Weather being one of them, that has a lot of data and are harnessing that power to help brands better engage with their consumer for better buyer outcomes as well.
All right. Felix, anything to add?
Yeah, I think in your quest to gather data, you gotta be careful and think one step ahead. There will certainly be more privacy regulation. No one is saying there will be less. And thinking about whether your solution has the longevity of going in the future, or whether it's something short term that will land you again in hot waters and where your reputation might be stained. You want to avoid those short term solutions. You want to think about what's a long term solution that respects users.
Lost you for a second.
Regardless what region. Yeah, that's you got to think about the solutions that can stand up to whatever regulations come out. And we all know there are different laws depending on your country, even depending on your state. And so really making sure that solution stands up to those tests, it's important for publishers.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank both of you. This is pretty much at time. So anything final that either of you would like to add or say? No, we did. We covered a tremendous amount of topics, and it's been almost an hour. So thank you both again for joining us. Really appreciate it. Really great discussion. Thanks everybody who made the time to be here and attend. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. So thanks a
Thank
lot.
you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Mitch.
Thank you again.
Bye.
Thank you.